right, well, I think we can get started. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Christine Catallo. I'm the Chief Librarian here at Pequot Library, and thank you for joining us for our upcoming Meet the Author event with Namina Forna. She's the author of The Gilded Ones, a New York Times bestselling epic fantasy YA novel. The sequel, The Merciless Ones, is scheduled to come out next year. Namina Forna is a young adult novelist based in Los Angeles, and she's originally from Sierra Leone, West Africa. She moved to the US when she was 9, and she's been traveling back and forth ever since. Namina loves telling stories with fierce female leads and works as a screenwriter in LA. So now I'll hand things over to Namina.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. So I am thinking of this as like a super intimate chat between me and you guys. I don't know who's on the other side of the screen, but if you're here, please say hi and like just, talk in the chat just so I can know that I'm not talking to a blank screen. I sort of want to be really free flowing with this. So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about me, my book, how I wrote it, just sort of like the craft of being a writer and how I get my inspiration and how I build worlds. I have beside me half a glass of wine and a glass of water. Please feel free, I believe it's 7 p.m. where you guys are. So feel free to just relax and let's just chat. All right. So let's tell you a little bit about me. I'm from Sierra Leone, West Africa, born and raised, came to America when I was 9, grew up in Georgia, went to undergrad in Georgia. I went to Spelman College, and then I went to USC for film school afterwards. And I am a novelist and a screenwriter. I write young adult, and my book, The Gilded Ones, came out this year, and it is a New York Times bestseller. So basically what The Gilded Ones is, it's like if the Dora Milaje from Black Panther were sort of stuck in the world of The Handmaid's Tale and said, burn everything to the ground. So that's basically just my quick pitch about what it is, but it's set in a super patriarchal world and in a super patriarchal sort of West African type world. And in this world, there's a group of girls who are considered monsters because they're faster and stronger than regular people, and they bleed gold. But then actual monsters come into this world, and the humans give the girls a choice, fight or die. And my main character, Deka, decides to fight, and in doing so, goes on a whole adventure that sort of changes her life and changes the world around her. So how I came up with the idea for The Gilded Ones, this is actually a book that came in stages. So really, this book came about because I was an undergrad and I was taking women's studies classes. And I was like, wait a second, you mean to tell me sort of all the things that I've sort of experienced in my life are part of a system? I want to write about this. I want to write a book that explains what it means to grow up in a patriarchy, who suffers, what system supported, and all of that sort of thing. And the reason sort of why I was inspired to write this is because, as I've said, I grew up in Sierra Leone, West Africa, and Sierra Leone is extremely patriarchal. I grew up around the time of the Civil War, but even aside from that, Sierra Leone was just never, it's not a good place for women. We have about I believe a 90% rate of FGM, which is female genital mutilation. And what sort of strikes me about Sierra Leone is that whenever horrible things happen to women, people sort of will always couch it in oh, this is good for you. For instance, with the FGM, it's usually your mom or your older sister or your aunt who will take you and when they take you to have this awful thing done, which results in the deaths and like disfigurements of so many girls, they'll say, oh, it's because it's what makes you pure and it'll make you a woman like ready to get married and all these things. So they make it sound like really, really nice, which it's not. And when I came to America, I thought America would be better. I was like, I am coming to America, this great shining beacon on the hill, like things are going to be different, like, and I quickly discovered that it wasn't, because like I grew up in Georgia, and I grew up in purity culture, basically, where like, it was just sort of like pervasive everywhere. And like when girls were being slut shamed and all these things were happening, it was always like, oh, it's for your own good, it's to protect you. And I was always struck by that. I was like, in Sierra Leone, it's overtly brutal. In America, it's the same. It's not as like in your face, but it's that same sort of like gaslighting language. And it was only when I went to college and I took women's studies classes that I was like, it's a system. And at that time, I was like sort of deciding what I wanted to do with my life. And some years back, I'd seen like J.K. Rowling, like, have like Harry Potter be a massive success. And I always had all these stories in my head. So I was like, wait a second, you mean to tell me that like you can make up stories and write about them and people pay you? Like before that, I hadn't realized that writing was a career. I thought it was just like, nebulous rich people like got to become writers, and like they just sort of lived in like these very fantastic houses and like, like on the beach with like the curtains billowing. I did not realize that that was something you could do. But like when I saw J.K. Rowling doing it, I was like, oh, this is something that I can do. And when I went to undergrad, I was like, oh, wait, I have an idea for a book. The other thing that was happening at this time was like, I would have this recurring dream. And it would be of like this girl, and she's like walking slow motion onto a battlefield, and she has a sword in each hand, and she like jumps up in the air, and like the dream always cuts out then. I didn't know what would happen, but I knew this girl was important. And so when I was like, I want to write a book that talks like that explains in very clear and sort of easy terms what it means to live in a patriarchy, I was like, wait a second, it's that girl and it's this. I just have to figure out the story. And so I had sort of the kernels of the Gilded Ones in undergrad, but it was when I went to grad school that I finally got the idea. I was in film school. I was sitting in class. I'll never forget, it was Bruce Bloch's class. And I was bored out of my gourd. And then the words that dropped into my head, I was 9 years old when first I learned I could not die. And these words became what would eventually become the Gilded Ones. So I wrote like the first draft of the Gilded Ones then in 2012. And I took it out and I tried to sell it. But I got nowhere, because back in that time, like, I'll backtrack by saying that like, it took me 12 years just to get an agent. I decided to become a writer in undergrad. And I wrote my first couple of novels in undergrad, but like, and I'd send them out and I'd get nothing. And so I was like, okay, maybe this is a pipe dream or whatever. So like I went to film school because I was like, which I was not a very smart person. But I went to film school because I was like, maybe I will find something that will sustain me while I'm trying to work on this dream of becoming a novelist. And so I wrote the Gilded Ones there. I wrote a couple of scripts. And when you go to USC Film School, when you graduate, you have this thing called first pitch, where basically you get your portfolio together and you talk to all these agents and managers. And I had during all this time been querying, and like never like really sort of like getting responses. And back in that time, because like the time I wrote the Gilded Ones and the time I went out for first pitch was like, I wrote the Gilded Ones in 2012, went out for first pitch in 2013. And at the time, there was this thing in the writing community that was like, Black people, people of color do not sell books. And they especially don't sell young adult books. And they especially do not sell books with like, Black people on the cover. So, and I sort of had that in the back of my mind, but like I was an immigrant, so like I didn't understand. I was like, American racism, what does that have to do with me? And so this whole time I was like, I just thought maybe my writing wasn't good enough, but it got to a point where I was like, wait a second, I'm in film school, I'm winning awards left and right. I am more than ready. Like, why is this not going anywhere? And then I did first pitch. And while I was in first pitch, I'll never forget this one agent at like a very powerful company. He came up to me after I'd like pitched him all my stuff. He's like, yeah, your stuff is really good, but nobody like will buy it because nobody wants to like buy Black things. And that was the moment where I was like, it is what I thought it was. And that was like a horrible, horrible time. But I kept pushing because I've always wanted to create safe spaces for other kids like me who like grew up in sort of adverse circumstances across the world. And so like, that's why I wanted to be a writer. So I kept pushing. And every time I got a rejection, I'd be like, this is a no for right now. It's not a no for forever. Times will change. And one day the stuff that I'm doing will see the light of day. And so finally in 2017, I believe I got my agent. And then in 2018, basically I was writing clickbait and my job was to sort of see patterns on social media. And I saw the reception that Black Panther, the promos for it, were getting online. So I emailed my agent. I was like, hey, I have a book. It requires a page 1 rewrite because I didn't go hard enough when I wrote it initially. And she's like, yeah, tell me about this book. I'm like, well, at the time, the Gilded Ones was called Deathless. I was like, it's called Deathless. And this is what it's about. And she's like, write it. So I wrote it in a month and a half. I'll never forget. And the day it went out was the day that it sold. And so that's how I became a writer. So that's my story. That is my writing journey. But now I sort of want to tell you guys a little bit about my process because I know, I don't know, is there anybody there who is a writer or wants to be a writer or is interested in publishing? Just sort of like, let me know in the comments. But my process is it's very sort of definite. I think one of the things about writing is that the hardest thing to do is to first sit down and finish an entire book. But after you do that, then it becomes understanding your process and understanding your writing hours. And those things are sort of very important. Like for instance, I'm a super early morning writer. I used to wake up at like maybe 2 to 4 a.m. to write, but I don't do that anymore because, that's not healthy. But I try to wake up like around 6 o'clock and start writing. And so like, I will typically write till around from 6 to 6 because like, I am not a late night person. It's really hard for me to stay awake at night. So I can't do that. But like other people can. Like I know one friend who she starts writing at 4 and stops writing around 12. And those are her hours. So it's like sort of really important to know your writing hours and it's important to know your process. My process is this. Typically, my ideas start with a dream. So like if we're using the example of the Gilded Ones, it started with the dream that I had of this girl in golden armor. She's walking slow motion on a battlefield, blah, blah, blah. right? So it starts off with a dream. And like when it does, I at that point sort of feel like I'm on drugs because like there's this high of having a new idea. So what I do is I immediately pitch it to all my critique partners, and I have several different critique partners. Each critique partner sort of fulfills a different function, right? So like I have critique partners who I bounce ideas back and forth with. I'm like, is this a good idea? Have you heard about it before? Like, and this is important because like when you have a critique partner to bounce ideas off of, like number one, they should be someone who is very, very supportive, because the worst thing is for you to like say this amazing idea to someone and they shut it down. That then just kills your idea, it kills your vibe. So you need a supportive and safe environment, but you also need somebody who is very genre savvy. What do I mean by that? Like if a friend is pitching me an idea, I'll immediately be like, oh my gosh, that sounds great. Maybe watch this movie or read this book or watch this TV show to help you shape and craft your ideas. Because you know, books, movies, different type of art forms feed off of each other. So like for me, when I have an idea, I immediately start watching movies like it and TV shows like it. And I also look for pictures. And then, so from then, I will like let the idea rest, and I'll do a year of what I call passive research. I feel like if you do like a lot of research immediately on a book, you end up overwhelming yourself. So for me, my passive research gives the idea time to breathe. Number one, because like you really do need to like, I feel like an idea is sort of like a seed, and you need to water it. You need to give it sunlight. You need to give it time to grow, right? So like the watering, giving it sunlight, basically what I do is I do my passive research. I'll watch documentaries on it, and I'll on things like, so for the Gilded Ones, for instance, like I'd watch documentaries, read history books about pre-colonial Africa, like all of these things, just to sort of get my mind right, especially if you're writing a book that is research heavy. Like typically fantasy to me is research heavy, in that you have to have enough research in order to write the book. Like you have to have a basis of reality to rest the book on. So like for me, you have to like for me, I spend a lot of time doing research just to sort of understand what the world looks like, what pre-colonial Africa looked like, in order for me to create my own world. One thing I will recommend at this point is there's a Netflix TV show called Alien Worlds. If you are writing fantasy or you want to be a world builder, I highly recommend you watch this TV series, because it's like a series of speculative documentaries where the first half of the episode typically depicts a scientific principle, and then the second half they use that scientific principle to create an alien world. And like that's what I do sort of in my craft as a writer, is I take all the research and then I let it, and then I'm like, okay, I have enough that I can go on and create my world. So once I've done like my year of passive research, usually it's about a year, what'll happen is I'll be watching a movie or a TV show or whatever, and all of a sudden the idea will come back, typically almost like a year to the day, and it'll come back like, you know, sort of stronger than before and like more fully formed than before. So what I then do is I do an outline, I talk to more critique partners, like finesse the idea some more, and then I do an outline, send it to critique partners who will look at it and make sure I've sort of worked out my problems in the outline, and then I go to pages, meaning that I actually write the document. And even then I'm not sort of done, because like my first rough draft is never my actual real rough draft. It's like my second rough draft is my sort of real rough, is my second rough draft is usually like the real draft. And once I have that, then it's like a matter of tweaking and finessing, and then it's good to go. So I actually wanted to share something with you guys. Let me show. So I've said before that the Gilded Ones used to be called Deathless. So I'm going to show you guys a little bit of my process of what I do when I'm getting ready to write a book. So I do pitch decks, right? Like these really help me figure out what my world and characters look like. So what I'll do is I will even like down to the text on the pitch deck just to sort of get myself in the frame of mind of this is the world, this is the characters. So I did this like sort of, and I use pictures that I'll find on the internet. So this is what the world looks like. This is what it's about. And I'll just like have all these pictures to really get my mind into this is what I want my world to look like. This is what I am inspired by. So as you can see, like the Gilded Ones is pre-colonial Africa. It's different places. I love this image of this woman. Like she is so gorgeous. So I'm just like, these are the things that like really help me get my mind together. And then when I wanted to talk about the Alaki, who are the superpowered women in my book, I, write up a little bit about this is who they are. This is, and I'm speeding through a little bit because I don't want, if in case you haven't read it, I don't want there to be any spoilers. So it's like I'm speeding through the text so you can't quite read it. But so these are just things that I put into like sort of everything to have me really understand what my world is. And like this quote, suffer not an Alaki to live, nor those that would aid her. I do little quotes like this just to, because like when you're writing a world, you have to know like what are the social systems, what would the Bible look like? What would people say? How would they speak? And so I like to do little things like this just to get my mind together. And so I'd also do something for like the main character. Who are my main characters? What is their relationship? And then the other thing that I do, and this is like, what's the main location? What does armor look like? Weaponry. And then the other thing that I do is I'm just gonna speed through that. But as you guys saw, like I actually do like a one-liner for each, like if it's a trilogy, what does each book in the trilogy look like? Just to sort of really get my mind into gear of this is where I'm starting, this is where I'm ending. How do we get there? And so that's a little bit about my process, or rather a lot, but I am very excited to see you guys' questions. And I'm very excited to sort of like open the floor.
Yeah, so thank you, Namina. That was super cool. I was really excited to see that. So we do actually have some questions that just came in.
Awesome.
So I will read them. So first question, are you afraid of being too influenced by other books and movies if they are too close to your idea?
Yes and no. On one hand, I believe that there's like maybe 7 different like stories in this world. Right. And so it's all in what you tell. It's because like I could have the exact same log line with another writer. What separates me from the other writer is the way that I specifically tell my stories, right? I think that every author should like write, like they should have like a thumbprint that, like when you're reading this book, there's the familiarity of this is this person's writing, like that's what you go back to certain authors for, is because it's their specific point of view. That being said, yes, I am concerned about, because I think, I do think that things sort of seep in sometimes. So what I do is that I will not read other books that are like my own while I'm writing. Like, so I typically don't read in the genre that I'm writing when I'm writing. So like I always have like a neutral genre, and my neutral genre is romance, right? So I will read all sorts of romance novels while I'm writing, but I won't read like other young adult fantasy until after I'm done with a book. And that's just to sort of ensure that I'm not dabbling in something that might be another author's words, because even if you don't mean it, sometimes they get into your head, and I never want that. So I just do other things until I'm done, and then I read all the books that I want. So yeah.
Cool. So the next question is, you are so visual when you create your outlines. Does this help when you adapt the story for the screen?
Yeah. Yes. So here's the thing. The big difference between film and TV and novels is so with novelists, everyone's like, I'm a pantser, I'm a plotter, I'm a this, I'm a that. Like, I actually think it's not as simple as that. I think that everybody's a mix of both. Like, I feel like every novelist starts off as a pantser on some level, and then depending on what you write, especially if you're writing something that's like plot intensive, you typically would need an outline versus if it's character driven, you don't really need an outline. The difference is with film and TV, you always, always, always need an outline, right? And that's because you have max 121 pages, and that's pushing it to write, right? And like you have to hit certain beats on certain pages, right? So like, for instance, you have to establish the status quo of the character within like the first 5 pages. By 12 to 16, page 12 to 16, you have to have had inciting incident. You need to break into act 2 by like page 25. Like, so it's like there are literal make or break pages that you have to hit as a screenwriter, which means that like you have to have outlined and re-outlined and re-outlined and done all of and corrected everything in the outline before you actually get to pages, or else you end up shooting yourself in the foot. So yeah.
That's cool. So why did the title change from Deathless to the Gilded Ones?
That was because my very fabulous editor, and she was completely right. She was like, this sounds sort of paranormal. I actually really like the Gilded Ones now. I was furious in the beginning. I was like, no, I've had Deathless since 2012. I've refused to give it up. But she was right, and I really like the Gilded Ones. So that was the change. Sometimes, another title is better.
Yeah, I heard somewhere that at like a conference or something, they said something that manuscript's working title almost never is what the published title is, which I thought was super. It was like a really high statistic. I thought it was insane, but super interesting.
Yeah, sometimes it's because like we get to attach to our title. Sometimes we forget that there might be better ones out there, so yeah.
That's cool. I do like Deathless though too. I think that sounds really cool.
I do. I mean, they were deathless and like you can kill them and they come back to life. The girls in my book, the Alaki. So yeah.
So okay, the next one. Are the images in your deck ones that were designed expressly for your novel?
No, not at all. I found them on Pinterest. Pinterest is the writer's friend. Like, so this is the thing, like when you're writing, like you need to put yourself, like you need to set the mood, right? Like writing a novel is almost like, this is a really bad analogy, but it's almost like romancing someone. But you basically, it's like you're romancing your mind, right? And so like you have to set the mood, like get your mind where it needs to go, right? So like that means having the images in your head of what is your world like? What are your characters like, or just even like the music that goes along with it. Like for the Gilded Ones, I like, basically it's like you have to have tonal references. That's what it is. So for the Gilded Ones, my film and TV tonal references were 300 and Spartacus, Blood and Sand. So like when people are like, oh my God, it's really brutal, this book, I'm like, well, yeah, in my references, everybody dies. So that should tell you about what kind of book that you're entering. So like have your references like that, right? Like for me, if I'm writing a book, I prefer to have like a film TV sort of tonal reference. So every time I feel like I'm straying, I go back and I watch the movie or the TV show, and then I'm like, does it look like does my book feel like this film or this TV show? No, okay, I've turned a corner, I've made an error, I need to get myself back to it. And that's what tonal references does. It's those pictures, it's that music, it's those movies that put you in the mood to write your book. So like basically romance your mind when you're writing a book. Yeah.
Pretty cool. So when you were talking about all of the different things that happen to all of your characters, there's a lot of tension. Like, I feel like you're really great at always pushing the tension. How do you achieve that? Like when you were outlining, was it something you were aware you were doing, or was it just something that came naturally to you?
The tension between characters in my book. Are you talking about like the I need
Oh, no, sorry. I mean, like pushing the tension in terms of like, it's always getting more like, I don't want to say everything gets worse, but do you know what I mean? Like the stakes get higher and higher. That's what I mean.
That is an outlining thing. Okay, so I'm going to circle back to this because I know that like there's the whole pantser and plotter and what have you. With a book like The Gilded Ones that is plot heavy, and typically action, adventure, and fantasy books are plot heavy, you really need a good outline. And you also need to have figured out all your stuff in the outline before you ever hit pages, right? So before you ever start writing the book, figure out your outline. Make sure you know everything that's happening, and not everything, because like for me, there's so much room. Like my outlines are like 7 to 8 pages long, right? And yet still, I always discover new things because the outline just tells you this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And so like in the writing of the book, then you discover all of these things. Like I discovered new creatures and all these things that weren't in the outline. That being said, in terms of like the actual plot of the book and the tension as you are talking about, that is, you need the outline in order to do that, right? Again, especially if it's if it's fantasy or action adventure, because then you're setting up the stakes, you're setting off planting and payoff, and planting and payoff meaning like, say at the end of a book, a person has to kill somebody with a dagger. You need to plant that dagger in like the beginning. So we track the dagger through the book so that when they killed like the villain with the sacred dagger, you know where it came from. That's planting and payoff. And also that elicits tension, because when we see the dagger, and this is something that goes for books and it goes for film and TV, we see the dagger in the beginning. Every time we mention the dagger, we know something's going to happen with the dagger. And so like that just builds tension until, somebody gets stabbed with the dagger. Also a very clever thing of planting and payoff that is not about tension. I just realized that Darth Vader means dark father.
Oh.
I was just like, cheers, I see you. That's really cool. Like, and if somebody spoke German, they would know that, but I do not.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh. I never knew that. That's awesome.
I never knew that. Also, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that that's what it means.
I mean, it sounds right.
Yeah.
Sounds right. All right, we just got another question. How many drafts did you write of The Gilded Ones?
Oh my God. Oh my God. Okay. So The Gilded Ones was a nightmare to write, in that I wrote the initial first draft. I wrote the initial first two, I think like first 3 drafts in like around 2012, right?
Wow.
I tossed those completely out and rewrote the book from scratch from page 1 in 2018. From there, after that first draft, I would say it took like 8 drafts for you to see the book as it was. And it was, and
Proud.
that was a labor of love because like when I was writing the Gilded Ones, my father passed, my sister passed, my brother passed, and my uncle passed. So it was just like I was writing and I was not in a proper frame of mind. So yeah, that book is a book of grief. Whereas the difference is that like I'm writing the merciless ones, and that's been like that'll be at the end 3 drafts. Like so each book demands different things and like you learn with each book. So I'm hoping I can get to a point where like I knock out a book in the second draft and we go, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So in 2012, did you know this would be a trilogy?
Yes.
You did.
It was always meant to be a trilogy.
That's right. Because in your slide deck, you had like a like a little one-liner about each one, which I didn't get to read, but
oh yeah, no, because I was moving too fast.
No. I know you didn't want us to see it.
Oh, and here's another thing that I did. So like in my book, like in the Gilded Ones, like basically women are forced to wear masks, but then soldiers wear masks too, war masks. And so another thing that I had done was I got a war mask made. So this is like basically like a war mask for one of the characters. And that also helped put me in the mood.
Which character is it supposed to be for?
This one is Kata.
Oh, okay. That's awesome. That's so cool. Okay, just had another one come in. How important is mythology to you? Is in terms of plotting the book?
Not at all, because like the Gilded Ones, I just made everything up. Like, so basically with the Gilded Ones, what was really important was actual pre-colonial African civilization. So like, because I wanted to write, I think in the United States and just in general across the world, we are so, African history has been intentionally hidden. We have been made out to be uncivilized and savages who don't, create anything. And so part of the reason for me writing this book was I wanted to create a fantastical tale that was set in a fantastical ancient Africa, right? So one of the things that I found, and the more I did my research, the angrier I got, because then I started realizing just how stuff was hidden. Like for instance, literally, so my grandparents are from Nigeria, and I grew up in Sierra Leone. Nigeria is it's in West Africa with Sierra Leone. And like, I didn't realize that in pre-colonial Nigeria, there are what were known as the walls of Benin. And these were walls that were once 4 times the size of the Great Wall of China. These walls could circle the United Kingdom. I believe it was like 16 times or something like that. They're that massive, and they were there. So basically what happened was when the British like took over Benin and stole the Benin bronzes, they burnt these walls to the ground. So we don't realize that those things were there. Or even like in the same place, Benin was in the 14th century had streetlights. It was the first sort of country with the streetlight system. And these are things that I found in my research that just, sort of boiled my blood, because like every time I read books about Africa, it's like, oh, darkest Africa, the darkest continent. And I'm like, but that being said, the Gilded Ones was not based on mythology. What it was based on was like, as I said, I wanted to create, hey, Poo-Poo, are you up? I like my Pooch Poo. My dog, Magnificent, has awoken and she has ascended from her bower. And then now she's like walking past me. So that was very hurtful. But anyway, so I wanted to create a book that explained what it meant to live in a patriarchal system. And when I thought about that, I was like, what is the easiest way to talk about the commodification, meaning like the assigning of a monetary value to women's bodies? So what is the easiest way to talk about the commodification of women? And I was like, oh, why not have them bleed gold and like be basically semi-immortal? Because the bleeding gold, like that right there is just the metaphor for like women's bodies are considered, you know, like you can assign a monetary value to them. And I was like, well, there it is. And so that was the mythology that I sort of came up with just based off of that. And so that is the mythology of their Gilded Ones. It's not based on actual mythology, although I do hope to get to actual mythology and actual stuff in other books.
Wow, that's really cool. So how did you come up with like the death streaks and all of that?
I love monsters. It just, I will always have monsters in all of my books. Like, it is funny. I am so like, I'm scared of like scary movies, you know, like I'm the person who goes like this, but just, I really like, you know, like when you're like in a scary movie, you know, like how the bones start crackling and all of that. I
Mhm.
really enjoyed that moment. And so when I was thinking of what could horrify, what would horrify me, I was like, what about these creatures and they're like giant and they're raw boned and gaunt and like they scream, and so it sort of just like they sort of just came into being
Mhm.
in the book. Like they weren't really based on anything. It was just this. I was like, what will terrify me? And then I was like, in horror movies, there's always mist when the monster is coming. So I'm like, well, why don't they bring the mist with them? And that's how the
Mhm.
death shrieks came about.
Yeah, I know I'm a scaredy cat too, but I did really enjoy the death streaks. I thought they were a cool monster. So,
Yay.
yeah. Okay, so I see we have some other questions. So you advise using critique partners that are supportive. How do you protect your ideas from others, even when you are romancing your project and are so enthusiastic about it?
Well, the first thing about critique partners is you have to trust them, right? So like a critique partnership, like is a friendship, like critique partners are typically your friends, right? So you need to find people who you trust, who are supportive, um, who you are, because if you don't trust somebody to not steal your idea, then that person is probably not a safe space for you to, like, you know. That being said, again, like I know one of the things about writers is that we're always terrified someone will steal our ideas. And I recognize, and one of the things to like sort of realize is that I thought she was eating one of my books, but then luckily she's eating a bully stick. So I was about to be
Oh,
like, what are you doing? Um, so one of the things that you have to like really just sort of realize is that certain ideas are in the zeitgeist. Certain ideas have a moment, right? Sometimes it feels like 20 billion people all have the same idea. And there's room for all those different iterations of that idea, of those ideas. It's about how you tell the story, you know? So I wouldn't worry about like people stealing your ideas unless it's like egregious, you know, like they literally took your script or they took your novel. That's like a different thing. But I would say the first and the biggest thing is find critique partners that you trust. If you don't trust someone, if they're not a safe space, you shouldn't be telling them your ideas, and you shouldn't even be around them in the first place. So find safe spaces. Yeah, that's the
yeah, I think that's great advice. Very important. So, okay, the next question is, how aware were you of the civil war that was going on in Sierra Leone when you were a little girl? Did this feed your story?
oh, very aware. You couldn't ignore it. Like as a kid, like I was a grand escapist. I think that's the reason I became a writer, was because I was always such in a state of terror. And like basically people in my family disappeared, like people that I knew started disappearing, and you couldn't ignore that. So what I did was I would read. Like I would read like my life depended on it, which it actually did, because books were this is why I'm a writer. For people like me, for people across the world who live in uncertain circumstances, books are a safe space. like there was so much as a kid that I did not have the wherewithal. Like as a kid, these are not things that you can handle, you know, like all the stuff you, so I just read. I was very aware of it, but like my safe space was reading, and that helped me through until finally I got to a point where I couldn't ignore things anymore. But thankfully, by that time I got to that point, I was an adult and I could get therapy. So, yeah.
Wow. Wow. So I had a, my goodness, I had a question and I forgot it. Oh, you mentioned lots of other stories you've worked on or books you've worked on. Are they also fantasy? Are they other genres? You want to tell us about them? You don't have to.
So I have like stuff that's cooking in the film and TV realm. I have books that are middle grade. Most of them are fantasy. I have one non-fantasy idea, and that's called The Roses of Cockerel, and it's basically going to be a memoir about my family. And just like what it was sort of coming, not me, but like my relatives coming of age during the independence. And you know, it's like the grand African novel. Like it's going to be lots of sex and drugs and powerful people doing shitty things. It's going to be great. But I'm typically a fantasy person. For me, there's just the delight in fantasy. I can tell you some of the project that we're hoping to go out with is about, anyway, fantasy. I'm like, how much can I tell you? Okay, so I'm going to go out with stuff with mermaids because I'm obsessed with mermaids, and I'm going to go out with stuff with princesses. There's one, like, I love princesses that are non-traditional and are like, I just came here to kick butt and take names. Like all my princesses are the people who show up and are like, let's kick butt and take names. Like I have one where she's basically a female version of a himbo. She's not very bright. She's just like, all of this could have been solved if we had just punched someone. What did I tell you? We could have just punched people and called it a day. And my main character is like, and you're a princess. She's like, yes. Of an actual country, yes. And he's like, God help us. Yeah.
That sounds really fun.
Yeah.
Is that going to be a TV show or a?
That's gonna be a middle grade fantasy novel.
Oh, nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah, I just like belligerent girls in general.
That's I think that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. And well, all the girls in the Gilded Ones, they may not start out that way. Like Dika doesn't start out that way, but she becomes that, I thought.
Yeah. So for me, one of the themes in my work, and this is the thing with writers is like we all have themes in our work, and typically it's stuff that we're working through. Right, because like I tend to like be like, if I read someone's book, I have a good idea of if I enjoy being around this person or not, because you can tell a lot about people from their writing. For me, I'm very obsessed with angry girls and with girls who are able to state what they want, because that's something at this point in my life that I am trying. Like I was always a very timid and fearful person because of how I grew up, and I still am. And I'm trying to work my way out of that. And I'm trying to be like the type of person who sells you on no uncertain terms, like immediately how I feel. And because I'm not quite there yet, I tend to have these characters who are, because they're the template of where I'm trying to go. So like, I really enjoy angry girls, because to me, a girl who embraces anger, is someone who is like farther along than I am, because as women or as femme presenting people, we're taught to tamp down our anger and to be demure and to like, and so I hope to be that one day. I hope to be like an outwardly angry girl. And so I'm working on it. But in the meantime, I am hoping that I am allowing just like a lot of little girls and like a lot of little femmes just all across the world to be like, I'm pissed and that's okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow, that's pretty cool. So, okay, next one's, will you write a book called Angry Girls?
I should. I really should. I really should. I also like soft boys. That's the other thing. I like to write boys who are very in touch with their feelings,
Mhm.
because I think that that's something that's like the opposite of the angry girl is like the boy who's like, I prefer to be chill. Let's talk this out. We can be sensitive. How about we cry it out together? Like, yeah,
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 yeah. And maybe they'll like meet in the middle a bit,
exactly. Yeah.
would be ideal. That's awesome. So who are your favorite authors?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So, all right. I could, all right. I'm going to tell you guys my favorite. So, my comfort author is John Mortimer. He's this old British, I'm pretty sure he's dead. Is he dead? He might be. He probably is. Anyway, he wrote the Rumple of the Bailey series, which is about like this old fat British lawyer who refused to retire, much to the dismay of pretty much everyone, because they're like, Rumple, you smoke all these nasty smelling cigars or whatever. I really like him because like the reason he's my comfort author is because my father introduced me to him, right? So I will read and reread those books just because every time I do, it's sort of like I'm talking to my dad. So that's my actual comfort read. I love like Neil Gaiman. The Graveyard Book is one of my favorites. I love Danielle Clayton. The Bells, like, was, I think, a really beautiful world. I'm going to include into there, I can never pronounce their names, but the writers of Avatar: The Last Airbender, because in my mind, they're authors too. So I love that. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, of course. Whoever wrote Farscape, nobody ever seems to know that, but Farscape was, it's a Australian American TV production, and is actually one of my biggest influences. So I love Farscape. So whoever wrote that, that's another of my favorite authors. And then right now, I love Natasha Bowen, who wrote Skin of the Sea, which is like this book right here. It's one of my favorites, new books.
I wanted to read that.
It's really good. It's really good. Solidly excellent. One of my favorite authors is Jordan Ifueko. I think she's amazing and fantastic. She wrote Raybear and Redemptor. I also love Farida, who wrote Ace of Spades. Who else? I love Nick Stone, Darren Martin, and I love, what's it called? God darn it, she wrote Christina Hammond Reed, The Black Kids. So a short list, very short, just to tempt the palate.
That's awesome. Wow. So I'm just wondering, so we have time for probably about one or two more questions, but I'm wondering, what do you do? I don't know if you ever have this problem, if you're struggling for inspiration, what do you do to get inspired?
I watch movies, I watch TV, because typically I get my ideas from like film and TV. So I watch movies. I also take long walks. Like, as authors, I just think it's a general authorly thing. You take long walks and you look eccentric. You're like, I'm taking a stroll, darlings, for the imagination, like that. But it really helps. Being by the beach really helps. You know, taking long showers too. That's great. These are things that I do for inspiration. But for me, and the other thing, I will say this, every morning I read like a host of different like publications. So like Slate, The Atlantic, BBC, Yahoo articles. Like I obsessively will like read just like whatever news I can get my hands on every single morning. And that's just because you never know what sparks the imagination. For instance, I once read this one Atlantic article that's about this zombie fungus, this fungus that zombifies like ants. And like, yeah. And I was just like, this is so cool. It's so creepy. I don't know, but I know that that's going to come back and be part of a story sometime. So reading widely helps, and not just books, but actually reading articles and like documentaries and things like that, that like sort of develop your mind, help with the creative process. And also, again, by the way, if you are feeling, what is the word when you have like brain burnout? Like, what is it called again? Like when you can't write.
Oh, writer's block.
Writer's block is actually burnout. And whenever you have it, you need to put down your stuff and walk away and go have a life. That's really important. Like I always like to sort of end with that, is that like people a lot of times think that, oh, I must write every day because that's what writers do, blah, blah, blah. I haven't written like weeks, and it's been amazing because I know I'm about to get my notes back any day. And when I get them, I'm gonna like breeze through. So part of the writerly process is taking care of yourself, having compassion and empathy for yourself, and lots of self-care. I take 3-hour-long baths. Yeah, seriously. Like self-care is important. Like you don't have to write every day. You should not write every day.
Wow, that's really great advice. Thank you. So do you have time for one last question?
Sure, I'm here for you.
Great. So someone is asking about, I believe you sold the movie rights to your book, right? So it's being made into a movie. Yeah. So how is the movie version of your book coming along? Is it hard to cut things out of the original story to make the screen version work?
It is extremely hard to cut things out, but that's why it's like being with a movie. Working on a movie is a more collaborative process. Working on a book is a collaborative process as well. People don't realize, like, you're working hand in hand with your editors, copy editors, even your publicists. All of these people go into making a book. And with film, there's so much more because there's all these different creatives who all have their own different vision as to what your work is. Also, like, books do not transfer to movies like one-to-one. It doesn't really work that way. So you do have to cut a lot of things out in order to create a coherent movie. And so it's very painful, but it is part of the process. But in books, generally, you cut things out all the time. And one of the things that I do is, like, I like to separate myself from my work, and I like to separate works from each other, right? I am not my book. Once I write it, it's out into the world. It's not mine, it's yours now. Like, it's whatever you read, however you interpret it, that's you, right? Because I have given it, I have done my part. I tend to think of myself as a conduit. I'm the conduit for the book, and I put it out and it's there, right? A movie to me is separate from a book. The book and the movie are not the same thing. So it's like whatever honors the story that is necessary, that's where I'm gonna go. And so that like, I like to think of it in that way. Like, is this honoring the story? Am I doing whatever I'm doing? Is it in the best interests of the story? All right, cool. All right, then. Yeah. So I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, that's how I think of it.
Yeah, I think it does. I really like your point that you think of yourself as a conduit for the story. I think that's sort of healthy in terms, like, because
Yeah.
oftentimes writers will be like, oh, this book is my baby. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, you
No.
don't,
Yeah.
you can't be
Because if
protective
you,
of it. Sorry.
yeah, if you over identify too much, then like you get pissed every time somebody gives you a note, and that's not helpful. So like, it is helpful to realize that all you are is the conduit, or rather, that's for me, all I am is the conduit. I put it out, I get it out, and then I step away, and that's that, and I move on to the next project. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. And yeah, so I think that's a great note to end on. So any other last thoughts before we sign off?
Treat yourself kindly. You are a person and not a machine. And this not only goes for writing, but just in general.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Namina. This is such a wonderful talk. So we really appreciated it.
Thank you all for having me.
All right. Take care. Have a good night. Bye, everyone.
Bye all.